President Bush celebrates a strong re-election victory. We'll tell you how he did it. Senator Kerry, gracious in defeat, left to ponder what went wrong. Moral values. We'll give you a look at the surprise issue that trumped the war, terror, and the economy as the decisive issue in the election, and how the U.S. Supreme Court and the Bush cabinet are likely to change in the next 4 years.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting tonight from CBS News election headquarters in New York.
Good evening. For a time there, it looked like we were in for another long post-election battle for the White House. But today, when Ohio finally went into the Bush column, it was clear the president had scored a decisive re-election victory. With decisions now everywhere but Iowa, CBS News estimates the president won at least 30 states and 279 electoral votes. Senator Kerry, 19 states, 252 electoral votes. Mr. Bush also won more popular votes than any presidential candidate in history, 3.5 million more than Senator Kerry. So how did he do it? In a nation so divided, in a race that seemed so close? CBS's John Roberts begins our coverage.
After another roller coaster night and an uncertain morning, President Bush this afternoon declared victory.
We had a long night and a great night.
While the margins in many states were tight, it was a significant win. The first presidential candidate to take more than 50% of the popular vote since his father did it in 1988.
America has spoken, and I'm humbled by the trust and the confidence of my fellow citizens.
The president's re-election playbook brought home a second term. His opposition to same-sex marriage, abortion, and destroying embryos for stem cell research made moral values a top issue, drawing out many Christian conservatives who stayed home in 2000. He increased his support among women concerned with family values and whittled down the Democrats' advantage with Hispanic voters. President Bush fielded the concession call from John Kerry just after 11 this morning. Mr. Bush told Kerry he was an admirable and worthy opponent and that he waged one tough campaign. When asked if the two could work together after such a divisive campaign, the president's press secretary insisted, absolutely. And Mr. Bush reached out to Democrats to put divisions behind them.
To make this nation stronger and better, I will need your support, and I will work to earn it.
But with solid majorities in Congress, President Bush now has the legislative muscle to get his proposals on tax cuts, health care, and Social Security reform through without a lot of help from Democrats. Aides say the president sees his victory as a clear mandate and plans to move aggressively on his agenda for a second term. The most urgent task will be to put Iraq squarely on the path to democracy. The war was one of the president's biggest liabilities in the election. And last week's bin Laden videotape was a sharp reminder to President Bush that he'll begin a second term with important work from the first still undone.
White House officials today played down the depth of the divide in America, though they did acknowledge the president has some distance to go to bring the country back together. But before he gets busy on that, he's going to take a little downtime at Camp David to rest up from the long campaign. Dan?
John Roberts reporting live from the White House. After vowing to fight for every vote in Ohio, the Kerry campaign did the math and decided there was no way the senator could win. Kerry telephoned the president. Then, as CBS's Jim Axelrod reports, Senator Kerry addressed his supporters.
To say goodbye, John Kerry returned to the place he first said hello. Boston's Faneuil Hall, where he declared his candidacy 14 months ago.
I wish that I could just wrap you up in my arms and embrace each and every one of you individually all across this nation. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
For a man often called aloof, it was a warm and poignant farewell, leaving his supporters outside with moist eyes, but with no question why he was conceding.
The outcome should be decided by voters, not a protracted legal process.
In the half dozen hours between this declaration from John Edwards early this morning,
that in this election, every vote would count and every vote would be counted.
And the concession later.
You can be disappointed, but you cannot walk away. This fight has just begun.
Kerry campaign aides analyzed Ohio and decided it could not be won. They made the case to Kerry at 8 a.m. He met with Edwards at 10. He phoned the president at 11. And it was over.
That you have taught me and you've tested me and you've lifted me up and you've made me stronger.
John Kerry will return to Washington, where he still has 4 years left in his 4th Senate term. But this afternoon, he promised it'll be a new man sliding behind his old desk.
I know your struggles. I know your hopes. They are part of me now. And I will never forget you, and I'll never stop fighting for you.
Senator Kerry left the national stage with this, quoting, "There are no losers in American elections because even if our candidate loses, we still wake up the next morning Americans." And that's a thought even the senator's harshest critics would have a hard time picking apart. Dan?
Jim Axelrod reporting live from Boston. Thanks, Jim. An estimated 120 million Americans voted in this election, the highest number ever. There were many issues that motivated people to go to the polls. CBS's Lee Cowan reports on the #1 issue.
In the end, it wasn't the clatter of the war. It wasn't the thud of the economy. It wasn't even the rantings of the world's most wanted terrorist. In the end, what voters say brought them to the polls was much more quiet. The #1 voter motivator, morality.
America's going downhill morally, period.
National exit polls showed that 22% of voters claimed moral values was their chief concern, more than those who list the economy or terrorism.
My moral stance and my position will always override any other issues.
It had been a strategy of the Bush camp all along. Instead of reaching out to undecided voters,
This is the very first time that I have felt that God was in the White House.
Thank you.
the president courted his predominantly white evangelical base, and it worked.
Bush lost the popular vote in 2000 because 3 or 4 million fundamentalist Christians stayed home. Well, guess what? They turned up in 2004.
I do.
And he got more help than he bargained for after the mayor of San Francisco began allowing same-sex marriages. It produced such an uproar among conservatives, 11 states put a constitutional amendment on their ballot to ban same-sex marriages. It pulled conservatives to the polls in droves, and the bans passed in all 11 states.
George W. Bush is the inheritor of the Reagan conservative movement on social and cultural issues,
which has Democrats concerned, not because morals are making headlines, but because morals, some say, are being used.
What this campaign played on were the politics of fear and the politics of scarcity and the politics of good and evil.
For those who thought morality was a sleeper issue during the campaign, most analysts agree it will not be that way during a second term. Supreme Court nominations could soon take center stage. And for conservatives, the highest voter turnout in decades could be an answer to their prayers. Lee Cowan, CBS News, Cleveland.
As we noted, it was Ohio, a state Senator Kerry thought to the end he could win, that finally gave President Bush his victory. The red areas went for the president in Ohio, the blue for Kerry. You can see the senator won only in the big cities. It wasn't enough. CBS's Cynthia Bowers reports how Kerry got bucked by the Buckeye State.
That Ohio would come down to the wire was no surprise, but how it got there was another matter entirely.
Open your ballot booklet.
As if sensing their starring role on the national stage, voters here responded in record numbers. 5.5 million people jammed the polls, voting into the wee hours because lines at some precincts stretched for blocks. Conventional wisdom says heavy turnout favors Democrats. Well, that got turned on its ear when Ohio Republicans turned out their faithful in droves. They admit it was no easy task.
And then in the last 72 hours, we moved heaven and earth to turn them out.
By the end of the night, John Kerry's campaign hopes were hanging by the thinnest of threads. He trailed Mr. Bush by more than 130,000 votes. But there was still a large number of provisional ballots to be counted, ballots cast by people who didn't appear on regular voter rolls.
Thank you for voting.
But as the hours ticked by, the numbers just didn't add up for Kerry. He would need virtually every one of those uncounted votes to win, and almost no one believed that was likely.
Those provisional ballots that come in are going to be all over the map. They're not just going to be in one camp or another.
Another notable development, despite all the time and energy Kerry spent trying to woo the youth vote, the effort here never seemed to strike the right chords.
If you can't assure people that they know who you are,